And you originally had some questions, and I kind of threw in some stuff. And so I think, Marion, you originally were asking questions just about Malcolm X. Am I correct in thinking that was?
Yes.
Yeah.
I got lots of questions.
I think you were the one that had the question. I mean, and this is something for me that I realized my own biases. Malcolm X in my past brain was bad, right? Like he was just automatically bad. That's it. Bad. And I remember when I was younger, I watched the film Malcolm X. It's old now, so I don't know if it's still on, but I remember that totally changed my perspective. Not to say that he didn't do things I agree with necessarily. He definitely is. He did things very differently than I would do things, but it changed my perspective on who he was, and I realized my biases as sort of like, I don't know, Christian white person growing up in the United States. That I don't even know where that bias came from, right? Like Malcolm X was just wrong, bad, evil, horrible person. And after watching that film, I realized he is a much more complicated, nuanced person. And I, for whatever reason, had these biases that I had grown up with. And I can't even think of why I even had them. So that just kind of was a big aha moment to me. So I don't know where we want to start. Ramses, I don't know. Do you want to share maybe an introduction to it? And Marion, since you kind of had the questions, you could maybe go from there.
It's funny. So I was thinking about this today as I've been getting ready for an event tomorrow. And I remember you saying that before in our group chat. And I remember thinking, how often does the media shape our perception of a person and or event? And I'm going to use this example not to be political, but to show how, depending on where you get your information from, it shapes your opinion. Last year in the Super Bowl, all the other media outlets, when they showed the president, they showed him being booed because that's what was happening in the stadium. However, if you were watching the information on Fox News, they piped in cheering sounds. So if all you watch is Fox, you would have been like, oh, the people at the stadium loved the president. And I use that as an example as talking about Malcolm. And because Malcolm was, in a word, well, the Nation of Islam was pro-Black. That goes against the establishment then of the United States, which was, in a word, you could say pro-white. And I'm not saying pro-white and pro-Black like one's better or worse, but when you have someone saying, so the things about the Nation of Islam, white people are blonde-haired, blue-eyed devils, they're evil, all they want to do is corrupt Black people, kill Black people, so forth and so on, which if you thought Nation of Islam, that's Muslims and Islam, you'd think all Muslims are bad people because they hate white people. When really, the Nation of Islam is more of a militant offshoot of Islam. That's not even Islam, that's just the Nation of Islam. And I think to a degree they've softened, but I don't really espouse or even like anything they talk about. There's things that I like that they do, like being pro-Black and saying that as a Black person, you need to build yourself up and take care of yourself and make yourself better. But then there's other things that they're into that I'm like, yeah, you're way too gone. You're more radical and, to me, less productive. So when you think about Malcolm and you talked about the movie, one of the things I remember when I was a senior in high school, and that's when all the pro-Black and the Malcolm X paraphernalia start coming out. And I'm like, Mom, I want a Malcolm X hat, and I want a medallion on a t-shirt. And she's like, no. And I was like, why? And she's like, because do you even know anything about Malcolm X? And I'm like, no, I just know that he's Black and it sounds like he's cool. And so my mom bought me the autobiography, and she was like, you have to read this and write me a 5-page essay on who Malcolm X is. So I was like, I'm going to do what I got to do to get the gear. But when I read it, I think things that get missed about Malcolm, because you got to look at, if we look at Paul's book, how he has it in 3 parts, you almost have to look at Malcolm in 3 parts. Malcolm before Nation of Islam, so when he gets transitioning from being incarcerated to Nation of Islam, anything that negatively happened to Malcolm was perpetrated by a white person. And that doesn't necessarily mean that all white people were bad, but when you listen to him when he's Nation of Islam, it's not that he hated white people, but his passion is derived from his childhood. His father was a black preacher in Omaha, Nebraska. The KKK drove his father out because his father was an apprentice, I guess you could say, of Malcolm Garvey or Marcus Garvey, who was like pro-black, let's go back to Africa, all that. And the KKK ultimately kills his father, but they bash his head in with a sledgehammer, lay him on railroad tracks. He gets run over by railroad. Obviously, he's dead. The insurance company says he committed suicide, so his family doesn't get his insurance money. His mom, for all intents and purposes, white passing. She has just a little enough melon that you could tell she's black, but she could be white passing. And it talks in the movie, it shows it, but it goes more in detail in the book that she goes crazy. And then it's the white social workers who splits his family up. So then he goes to an orphanage, an all-white orphanage, where he even says that I heard the N word so much that I thought that was my new name, because that's all he was ever called. Then he transitions to Boston. He gets into being a burglar, running numbers. He dating a white chick. They're burglarizing people's houses. The white girls get probation. He gets 7 years sentenced to prison. And he's still on drugs and living that life when he meets Baines, who helps him transition to become Nation of Islam. So in his mind, when they're saying white people are blonde-haired, blue-eyed devils, and he's thinking about all the negative things that have happened to him in his life, that makes sense. Now I have a person to put that blame on. And if you want to flip it, when you look at white supremacy, and it's usually the ones who are the most ardent are the poor that lives in the South. They wanted someone to feel like they were better than, like, I'm poor, but I'm not black, or I'm not Chinese or Italian or Irish or whatever. And so that hierarchy, that caste system, as you could call it, really emboldens his speeches. So it's not that Malcolm, to me personally, was racist. It's just that the Nation of Islam and its message resonated with his life story until he gets silenced because he said the comments he made about JFK, and there was jealousy in the Nation of Islam. So he gets silenced, and in the meantime, he goes to Mecca. And so that's that middle portion. And then the last half, or last third, is when he goes to Mecca and realizes that the Nation of Islam is more radical than it is real. It is, in a word, bastardized what Muslims are supposed to be. It's supposed to be a brotherhood. We're supposed to love everyone. And he talks about worshiping with people black as tar and white as snow, and everybody loved each other. And that's where you see, and what makes him appeal to me the most is because how many people in history are literally do a 180. Their eyes are open and they realize the things I was saying were harmful, and now I'm going to do the things I can to repair it. He wasn't ever backtracking on Black nationalism, that in order for Black and white people to coexist, Black people have to be able to take care of themselves first. And then we can work on being together side by side. He was a proponent of owning guns because he was always getting death threats and he could see the police brutality. So in his mind, why shouldn't Black people be armed to protect themselves? And then as he transitions and, he's battling with the Nation of Islam, then he gets assassinated. And so I think the media, J. Edgar Hoover, because, which is a funny thing about J. Edgar Hoover, because the rumors is that J. Edgar Hoover was white passing, that actually he's Black, but he was passing, which is an interesting thing, that you would think that he would want to not be so anti-Black. Like, I want to say it's William White. He was, for all intents and purposes, I'm going to call it Austin. He looked like Austin, except for he was Black. And he worked with the NAACP in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and went undercover into the KKK in Arkansas to show and to be able to report just how violent the KKK was, and all the lynchings, the intimidation. And he's the one who exposed it, to the point where I was reading about him, and he's in a meeting with the leaders of the KKK in Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and they're like, there is a traitor amongst us. There's a Black guy who's pretending to be white, and we need to figure out who he is. And then when it comes out, he like slides away in the middle of the night so that they don't get him, because eventually I think he felt like they were going to figure him out. But I think that is the part of the media. The media will portray people in a way that if we're not willing to do the research ourselves, we will have a perception of someone. And Malcolm X, honestly, is not going to resonate with everyone. There's a lot of Black people I know, they're like, he was just too much for me. I'm like, it's all right, because I'm a more of a, you hit me, I'm gonna hit you back kind of person. So that's right there. We're good. But I think for that period of time where you had Dr. King, who was nonviolent, let's integrate, let's be together, Malcolm was like, no, we can be together, but I got to take care of me first. And it's an interesting concept that before integration, Black communities throve. And I was reading something the other day that said, before integration, the Black dollar circulated in the community 4 times before it ever went outside of the community. Which, when you think about that, when we think about investing in our own communities, wherever you live, if you're buying in your community, you're strengthening your community. And I know it's kind of funny, because when I lived in Arlington, I could go to the other side of town for cheaper gas, but I'm like, but I want to put money into my zip code, because then those tax dollars are going to fix my roads and all that stuff. And it seems like you live in the same city, but I think we miss that. And I think that is the thing that, to me, that is missed about Malcolm, is that we know what he was before, but we don't talk about what he became, because it's who he became. To me, is his legacy. Being willing to say, you know what, I was wrong. That there are good white people, and we can work with white people to achieve a common good and make America better, as opposed to, no, we got to keep everybody separate, and you do your thing and I do my thing. And yeah. But Marion disappeared on us.
No.
Because she's the reason why we're having this conversation.
Well, I know Morgan had some questions too, so I don't know, Morgan. Do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have any specific questions. I read the autobiography over the summer. I went to Omaha with Marion and Carolyn, and they were so nice and gave us a free copy of the book. And I over the summer, and I guess I had a bit of a different educational experience than you guys did. I didn't have any necessarily negative feelings or perceptions about Malcolm X, but I really had none altogether. They really focus on Dr. King and education, talking about his movement and not a whole lot about Malcolm X. So I was kind of a clean slate, just kind of learning for the first time about this stuff, and it was super impactful. I don't have any specific questions. I'm just kind of here to hear about what you guys have to say about it, and maybe that'll bring up some more specific questions. But yeah.
All right,
The
Marion.
ringleader's back. What you got, Marion?
Sorry, I had to take a cake out of the oven. We got a birthday tomorrow. This has been so interesting for me because Carolyn and I have lived through this. We were, he was born 3 years after my parents and died, was assassinated in 1965. Carolyn and I would have been, ninth grade. And I kind of put this into perspective, and maybe this will give you some insight what was happening during that time. For me, I was into the Beatles. So this was the year before the Beatles performed at Dodger Stadium that I got to go to. This was their last live concert. They didn't go on tour after that. So this was Beatlemania at its height. Also, it was the escalation of the Vietnam War, which was, our country was so divided, very similar to what we're experiencing right now for different reasons, different things going on. So we had, that was a big part, either pro or against Vietnam War, which brings a question that I'll ask in a minute that I need you to help me with. But it was also the first spacewalk, the first time an astronaut went outside of the capsule to walk. Right. We were celebrating now, watching the television every time there was a space launch. That was amazing. It was also the year that The Sound of Music was first shown, and My Fair Lady. So we had great things, awesome things happening. Also, I thought this was interesting that the first Sony home video recorder came out that year. We were on the verge of this new, just a boom of discovery. It was also the year that Martin Luther King did the Selma to Montgomery walk. So there was that kind of the peaceful part of that part. And interestingly, that was the year that the Voting Rights Act was passed to allow Black people to vote, basically. That's how long it took us to get to that point. I guess my questions, first of all, I agree that what we got on the 6 o'clock news or in the Tribune or the Deseret News. We didn't have this immediate update on what was happening. We were being reported to by Walter Cronkite, who was perceived as the master information. He knew everything. He had the right take on everything. We got, and everybody else, there were other sources, but he was our source. So what we heard came from Walter Cronkite with whatever spin he had, and very much from a white perspective. We didn't hear Black people talk about this stuff. They didn't have a voice. We heard white people talking about what are these Black people doing. That's kind of my memory from being however old. What were we, 14, 15? years old at the time. But I always associated Malcolm X with the Black Panthers. That's what I want. That's one question I've got. Let me tell you my questions. So, who were the Black Panthers? So, for example, when I watched Forrest Gump, that scene with the Black Panthers, I kind of assumed that was Malcolm X who was doing the slapping around and stuff. I don't think that's true. But
no, that was movie, but yeah.
That was what I perceived from the reporting I got when I was 14, 15, that Malcolm X was Black Panther. So that's one question. The other question is Elijah Muhammad and the role that he played. He was the leader of the Nation of Islam. That whole thing, we were a Christian nation back in 1965. So I knew Islam, I knew what that was, but I didn't understand the difference between the main Islam religion group, which was mostly the Middle East, and the Nation of Islam. It's very different, and I don't quite know the difference, but I think that's a Black church, Nation of Islam, and that their tenets are so interesting. They're very Black nationalists that teach that Black is the original Adam and Eve thing, and the whites are the ones that are aberrations of that, something like that. So that's the other thing, Nation of Islam. And the big thing between Muhammad Ali was a hero in that day. But for us, it was Cassius Clay. I thought he was amazing. He was flamboyant and vocal. Well, I admired him. I thought he was amazing. But I couldn't understand why he changed his name to Muhammad Ali and what that meant. And I know there's a relationship that was very strained between the two of them. And later he regretted. But I also, what do you know about his assassination? Did the Nation of Islam take responsibility for that? So lots of questions.
Okay, so the first one, the Black Panther Party is probably more of an offshoot of Malcolm. They adopted pretty much, I always felt like they picked up the mantle and moved forward, except for them, they took into like, instead of we're going to carry guns, let's be educated about the law. So that if I get pulled over and the cop says, I'm going to take your gun, well, why are you taking my gun? Are you taking my gun because I committed a crime? Or are you just taking it because you don't want a Black person to have a gun? The Black Panther Party then policed Black neighborhoods. They're the ones who took care of the Black neighborhoods, kept gangs out, kept drugs out, made sure that the community was safe. They had free lunch programs and all those kind of things. But they were Black nationalists. They were Black power and all those things, which is the reason why they ended up dying, getting killed by probably, it was Chicago police, Oakland police, but really it was J. Edgar Hoover seeing them as a threat to that threshold of what I am comfortable with seeing Black people say and do on television, in public. Afraid of, it's crazy, it sounds an uprising, but it wasn't really an uprising. Today, the word woke has been made into a cuss word, but when you think about what it means to awake, it means wherever you were, you have learned and now your eyes are open. In the church, we call that receiving revelation. Mm-hmm. It's all being awoke. I mean, when you, like, Stephanie will know that we were talking about School Days, at the end of it, Spike Lee has the cast saying, wake up. Because the movie deals with Black colleges and Black fraternities and sororities, and how the mentality, the slave mentality of, because you're lighter skinned, it means you're a better black person than someone who's darker skinned, and hair texture and all that. So it's a really interesting concept, but that's really all being, you read, you learn, you are educated. And now because you're educated, you're able to see the world differently than what you were told. So that was them. That was that the downstream effects of Malcolm until they were killed. And then the Black Panther just kind of went away. Black neighborhoods kind of went away too. They went down really quick. It comes to the Nation of Islam. You're right. Nation of Islam is more black radical. So if you put radicals on this side and non-radicals on that side, Nation of Islam radicalness can be seen as the black version of white supremacy, the KKK, because they were just as radical, except for instead of running around burning people and killing people, they were just, like you said, black nationalists. Let's take care of ourselves. But at the same time, they're calling white people blonde hair, blue eyed devils. When Malcolm, so to Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, when you watch Ali with Will Smith, I always thought it was really interesting that it opens with him being like 8 or 9, and he's riding. So he grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. So he grew up in the segregated South, even though technically Louisville is a border town, but Kentucky is just as segregated and racist as any deep South state. But it opens up with him reading the paper of seeing Emmett Till's mutilated body in the casket.
Yeah.
And again, to me, my impression is growing up in the segregated South and seeing how black people were treated. And then Malcolm is very eloquent. He's very engaging. He's very persuasive, and the words resonate with then Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali. And it's an interesting thing because Muhammad Ali becomes, for a minute, he's Nation of Islam, but he's Muslim. More so than he's Nation of Islam. And you're right. He has said that if he had it to do over, he would have stayed with Malcolm instead of staying with Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad, if I remember right, was the precursor. Stephanie, you can go ahead and laugh at me when I say this. Elijah Muhammad was the precursor to Don King. Both were felons, went to prison, got out, con men. Elijah Muhammad starts a religion. Don King becomes one of the greatest boxing promoters who swindled Muhammad Ali out of millions of dollars because he knew Muhammad Ali didn't know any better. And so, but you have a time where you're speaking to black people who, in the South, you're dealing with Jim Crow. In the North, you're dealing with systematic racism because I only can live on this side of town. I only can go to this school. I only can shop at these places. I can only do these things. And my mom, which she's your age, she talks about how when she was a teenager and during the Vietnam War, that she was like, you know what? Except for the fact that Nation of Islam had this weird that you had to be 7 times 2 plus 3 and some other stuff to be married to a man. So she's like, I'm going to marry, if I'm 20, I'm supposed to be marrying a guy who's like 45. She's like, well, that doesn't work for me. And there's some other things that she said didn't work for her, but she talked about how the Nation of Islam, how it took dudes who were alcoholics or drug abusers or pimps and made them to good, upstanding men. It's just that wasn't what she could do. She, in the North, she's like, I don't get down like that. It was too radical for her. So, like I said, it has its pros, but for me, it had more cons than pros. And to your point, Ali was a great person. Like, the person he was didn't ever change. It's just that he changed his name. And I think because he became Muslim and he was against going to the war, it's a funny thing that he got railroaded and was denigrated because he didn't go to the war. But we can think of a whole lot of white politicians or wealthy white men who, oh, I've got bone spurs. Oh, I was taking an internship in Canada. Oh, I joined the National Guard, but I didn't ever actually report to the National Guard. All these other things that they did to dodge the draft. And you're upset because Ali said, I'm not going. It was probably one of the reasons why they didn't like Malcom X either, because he's like, why am I going to go fight someone that has not done anything to me? But the people who want me to go are the ones who treat me like the enemy. And so it's all of that kind of wrapped into one. It just, again, ultimately comes down to the media, because it's the way the media presented that information. It's not like when you were a teenager, you had Google and be like, hey, Google, tell me what happened in DC today. And you get the information. If it was printed into the news, or like you said, Walter Cronkite, and I remember as a kid watching him on CBS, the evening news.
Yeah.
Whatever he said, I mean, that was law.
That was true.
That was it. Whether it was true or not, that's what it was. And so that's the difference in
fact,
life.
that's how he ended his show. And
Right.
that's the way it is. That's how he ended every newscast. How did we know?
No, and you weren't supposed to, but I think that is the advantage that Morgan has in a lot of this generation coming is, for me, I had to get my information from an encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm.
My older kids got to use the internet. My two new subsidized roommates, they can technically ask Alexa, hey, Alexa, tell me this. And Alexa spouts off whatever.
Okay.
And I think that's where now there has to be the caution, because we can tell them this and give them perspective, or our perspective. And then as they get older and they start doing their own research, and it's opposite of what we've told them,
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes a problem. Then it becomes, well, my grandparents told me this, but I did my own independent study and I'm reading this. I'm learning this. And they don't mesh. So who's telling me the truth? And that is what we find in the church, which Carolyn mentioned before every majority of people joined. You're talking about the podcast that Paul and I just did, that I think when you begin to learn the truth, now you have to go through and reconcile what you've learned to what you know. And for some people, it's hard to differentiate the truth between, I want to believe my parents, but I know that my parents were wrong. How do I keep that relationship when I know that they were wrong? And that is a struggle. And that's not just religion. I think that's with everything today. This new generation has so much access to information that as a parent, when I talk to my kids about stuff, I'm like, this is what it is. You don't have to believe me, but if you want to know the truth, go and read, and don't just read one source. Read as much as you can through all different sources and then form your opinion. And I think we're getting to a point where we're learning that. I mean, I think saying that Dr. King cheated on his wife, which is true, doesn't mean that he was a bad person. It just means that he fell victim to the flesh. The natural man is the enemy to God and will be forever and ever. And I think when we bring up the negative, trying to smear someone's reputation, I think that can be harmful. And that's one of the things with Paul I talked about. I'm like, and we've talked about this, you and Carolyn and I, that it's not about whether Brigham Young was a racist. To me, that doesn't really matter if he was a racist. Like, let's pretend he was a racist. Well, does that change the fact that he was a prophet of God?
No.
Noah was a prophet, and they say Noah was a drunkard. Like, I mean, does that mean that Noah wasn't a prophet? And I think we get caught up on wanting to assign labels instead of looking at the whole picture. I was talking with Darius Gray, and not to name drop, but this is in the training I'm doing, I'm examining this, that he was like, what is the greatest tool that Satan came up with to keep mankind away from returning to Heavenly Father? Racism.
Racism.
And I was like, that's true. Think about it. I don't like you because you're white or you're black. I don't like you because you're Protestant or Catholic. I don't like you because you're Muslim or Buddhist. I don't like you because you're from here or there. Satan's goal has always been to create chaos and division. What better way to create chaos and division than use race? And as long as we fall into the trap, we get stuck. He's like, if you look at it from that perspective, anything that Satan can do to keep us closely aligned to the great and spacious building versus being closely aligned to the tree of life, Satan is winning. His goal is to create confusion and to put people in disarray and create discontent, which then hardens your heart so that you're not able or willing to receive the truth and hear it and understand it when you hear it. And I was like, okay. And then he challenged me to add that to my training. I was like, okay, I'll work on it. So I got a question too, Carolyn. What's your question? You're on mute.
Muted.
Mute.
You're on mute.
I do have a question, but I can wait. And
I
I
don't
don't know if this is time. Well, it's not, it's kind of a question. So when I really like James Baldwin, and when I read a book about James Baldwin, as I understand it, the problem with me getting older is I read a lot of books and I don't remember anything. So I want to be reminded of this, that he looked into joining the Nation of Islam, but kind of rejected it. As I remember, that he rejected Elijah Muhammad as being not exactly how he wanted to. I mean, James Baldwin just was such an amazing person in the way he presented his blackness.
Right.
But it seems like that Nation of Islam was not a direction he necessarily wanted to go. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes out, and I think this is what made them silence Malcolm. In the book, it talks about when he says the chickens have come home to roost when Kennedy is assassinated.
Mhm.
However, as Malcolm is then silenced, women in the church are coming to him in droves saying that Elijah Muhammad has fathered their child, that this is their children. Now, in Nation of Islam and Muslim, they are what we believe, straight monogamy. It's you, your wife, nobody else. And as he's asking questions and finding more truth, he's becoming more and more delusioned and is essentially being pushed. There was jealousy and there was intense jealousy, but I think, Baldwin saw that.
Mhm.
He could feel the hypocrisy, and
Mhm.
that kept him like, I don't know if I want to be a part of that, because what does that do to me?
Mhm.
It's kind of like, so when you grow up in the city, it's one or the other. Either you're a passive driver, or you're an aggressive driver. I'm an aggressive driver. I'll admit it. And I was talking to Anna D today, and I was like,
Somehow that doesn't surprise me.
that's not very nice. I told Anna D today, I was like, you know what? I was like, this faith matters thing. I was like, it's caused a problem. She's like, what? I was like, I don't know if I can drive the same way anymore. I was like, now I have to behave when I'm in public. She's like, wow. I was like, because people are going to be coming up like, hey, are you that guy that was on Faith Matters? And I was like, maybe. Because I was at BYU a couple years ago after I was on Come Follow Up, and some people approached me because they saw me, and I'm like, awkward. It's like, now I really got to behave, because I was out today and a friend of mine was like, hey, my wife loved you and come follow on Faith Matters. I was like, oh. I was like, yeah, I gotta kind of be chilling for real, so that they won't be like, that guy Ramses on Faith Matters, he seems really cool and spiritual, but man, he's crazy on the highway. You gotta watch out. So I'm like, dang it. Now I got a target on my back. So I'm thinking I'm gonna start wearing my white mask when I drive, so they just think I'm a white guy driving, and they won't know the difference. It's a joke. Morgan, you can laugh. It's okay. I know you don't know me well, but it's a joke. That's way too much work to wear my white mask.
Anybody else have any other questions? I guess just open mic at this point.
Stephanie, what you got? Because you're over there quiet, chilling in the cut.
I just wrote down a few thoughts. You know me. When you said Malcolm X said, "Why should I fight for people who hate me?" And I think about in the 1800s, the Buffalo Soldiers, they were pretty much forced to go and kill the Indians. But here's the thing, they thought it was better to fight than to be a slave.
That's right.
And that just hurts my heart. But at least with Malcolm X, we have evolved enough and have enough say to say, no, I'm not going to do it. We still have persecution, but they're not making, everybody go,
Right.
And so, and you think about that. It's like we can't wiggle out of it. Okay. We can't wiggle out of it. And when we do go to fight and serve our country, we don't get the same benefits. We don't get the VA and housing and whatnot. So it's still off kilter, and yeah. So to me, war is, whether you're black or white, I'm going to tell you right now, if I see a schizophrenic veteran, it just goes through me, because they have seen so much death and horror, and they were made are told you have to kill somebody.
Right.
And it just goes through me. I mean, it's just like, how can, well, that's it. I'm going to stay quiet now.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. Let me think of his name. He did the movie American Sniper.
Bradley Cooper.
Thank you. That happened that happened probably like about 15 miles from my house at that gun range where the guy he portrayed killed his friend. And living in Arlington, living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, now there's 2 VA hospitals, and there's a VA cemetery, and I probably saw more homeless veterans who had emotional issues from being in the war, especially from the Vietnam War, than anybody I've ever seen. I'm not to take away people who were like in Desert Storm and all the Iraqi and Afghan wars, but I remember my mom saying what you said, that growing up in Cleveland, she's like, we were against the war because we were forced to go, being Black young men. Some of them just graduated in high school. Even if they had a college scholarship, they were being forced. She's like, but the white counterparts were able to go to college and live their life like it was okay. And she goes, I cannot count how many dog tags came home of guys that I knew from the neighborhood who were in Vietnam and died. And parents are having to bury their 18 to 21-year-old. It's like, when we think about missionaries, how do we feel if we send, we've got, I think it's 80,000 missionaries right now. If something crazy happened and a quarter of them just got killed, would we see serving a mission the same? Well, yeah, because it's a mandate, but there's a difference between forcing someone to go die versus going to go serve. And you're right. And I think that is, as I work with the Buffalo Soldiers and do more research, you're right. It was kind of, this is post-Civil War. Do I stay and get treated like trash, or do I go and at least have the opportunity to have some type of pride? And that's hard. It's a hard life to have to decide. Do I stay knowing that soon Union troops leave the South and then Jim Crow kicks in? And then I think that's one of the good things about Sinners. I don't know if anybody on here has seen it, but I thought it was a good thing that Ryan Coogler did when he showed the chain gangs. Because we think about chain gangs, oh, those are the guys who were criminals and they're having to work because they're criminals. When in reality, the majority of the chain gangs were Black men who got put in chain gangs because they didn't have a job, or because they jaywalked, or anything they could, which then on a chain gang, then you get rented out by the prison to go work in the cotton fields. And I thought he did a really good job of showing that, because I think most people don't realize the significance of that. I mean, technically, they still do it in prison right now. I mean, you think,
Oh, yeah.
if you want to get a Black license plate and the DMV tells you they're behind, it's because the demand for Black license plates is so high and the inmates haven't been able to catch up to the demand. Sounds crazy, but that's where that comes from. What's your question, Marianne?
Well, it will take us off topic. So if there's someone who has a question on topic, I'll defer to them first.
I don't know that we have a true straight line. I think it's just kind of when you're in the merry-go-round, the flashback and or they call I think it's the Mr. Freeze now. You go forward and then it takes you as high as you can go where you can see Dallas and Fort Worth at the same time. And then it drops you about 40 stories and goes backwards till it stops. So I mean, I think we're somewhere in there.
Okay. An observation and something I'd kind of like to throw out there, and then a question that I think Stephanie told me about, or I don't know if it was Stephanie or Lasagna. But first of all, I'm seeing a ton of podcasts kind of based around the second declaration this month, yours. Some of the others, there's lots of them.
Yes.
Just if this had happened, just a historical thing, if this had happened 20, 30, 40 years ago, their church membership would have been called into question. To have a podcast to challenge independent thought,
Right.
we're in our family are very well aware of that, Rachel, and I know about that and the risk that our loved one has had because of that. But my question, what do you think is going to happen with the brethren as they see, do they see the number of podcasts where the question is being asked or a statement, yes, we really do have some information on why this happened? Do you think it's going to lead eventually to some action on the part of the brethren to address that?
Me personally, I hope so. Just as a segue, since you brought it up, I did one yesterday, so it'll come out, I don't know, the next couple of days. So yeah, I'm gonna just brush past that real quick. Pretend like I didn't
Send
say
it
it.
on.
Huh?
Send it to us.
I will share it. But it's my hope. It's funny, Carrie Bartlett commented on Faith Matters Facebook page about, I don't know if did you see it?
I saw it.
And so our
Very
conversation,
good.
and Carrie, sorry. And I do hope so. I do hope, let me rephrase that. I know they're aware. And the reason why I know they're aware is, I don't remember his name, but it's with John, by the way, because Tom Reed did one
Yes.
last week.
Yes, he did.
And so they went through all three of them, you know, articles of faith, polygamy, the racial declaration number 1, racial declaration number 2, and Tom gave his input. And he sent it to me. So while I was in Texas, I'm trying to get ready for my event and I'm listening to it and like going back and forth. But so I know, especially with Tom's, they're going to be aware because the host is a friend of Raquel's. And so I think that's the reason why Tom was selected to do it.
Oh.
That's my opinion. I don't know that for sure, but Tom did mention, see you, Stephanie. Tom did mention that the host is a friend of Renell's. So I don't know if they're in the same ward or they're just friends. I don't know. But it's my hope that as they are watching and they are listening, it causes introspection of how the way as Carolyn so passionately expressed, but they do know, we do know. Why do we keep pretend like we don't? And, you know, in a loving way, I was like, technically we don't, because we don't really know what Brigham was thinking.
Yeah.
Now, the three of us, because we spent time with Legine Caruth, we got a little bit more insight, and she shared her research with us, so we have a little bit more insight. But without him coming out and saying this was me, we don't really know why he said what he said. So it's a nice way to dance around it. It's nice to say that we denounce all past things, we denounce white supremacy and all those things. But as I will say, and I've said, until you start holding people accountable for that behavior, if you start holding people accountable for their racist beliefs, we're talking about today. Yesterday happened, and I'm not saying that to be dismissive, like get over it, because it plays into where we are today. Where we are today is we have church leaders who are sitting in authority, forget the general authorities and all them, just local leaders who, because the first presidency or the Quorum of the 12 has not said we can do this or talk about this, their path is, well, we don't talk about it. But then I would counter with, well, did you read the first article from 2013 about race in the priesthood? Or did you read the one that came out earlier this year, Race in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Because the document that Black Lives Blessed pulled, or that we produced, leans into both of those. Now, we have some of our free thought in there a little bit, but it leans into those so that if you wanted to teach it in Sunday school, you were not in violation because it's coming from what the church has said. And you saw what I said, Mary, and I'll share. My hope is, as I go through the refining process of this learning, of this training that I'm doing, that it gets to the right people. That as I shared with people, they provide feedback, we refine it, that they look at it and be like, you know, this is valuable. Let's use this to do trainings, because it's not about saying, again, I'll say that Brigham was racist. We understand that racism existed in 1852. To pretend like it didn't is to pretend like the sky is not blue and grass is green. Unless you don't water it, then it looks like it's due to ground. But that's neither here nor there. I digress. I apologize. I'll use a better one. The sun comes up in the east and sets in the west. How about that?
Yeah.
So that's concrete. My hope is that they see that in the evolution of Article of Faith number 9, that we believe in constant revelation. That constant revelation means that their hearts are softened to have the courage to say, hey, we acknowledge the harm that this has done, and as a body, we apologize. We are calling upon you to have self-introspection. And if you have, and it sounds dumb, because President Nelson has about 4 talks that says, look inward, in whatever racist prejudice or racial biases that you have within yourself, root it out. But if you're in a ward that looks just like you, your experiences, Marion, how can you know that you have that? Because everybody looks like you and thinks like you. So they said something crazy, like Carrie mentioned in her class, that the teacher was like, we're not going to talk about race in the priesthood, and her class laughs. And I'm thinking, when I'm reading, I'm like, well, that's ugly. How about we don't talk? I'm not going to talk about polygamy because I'm a guy and you girls just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
To me, that's kind of how it feels. You're being completely dismissive of the impact that a church policy had upon people, good, bad, and different. And so that's my hope. My hope is my stake president and we're meeting regularly about what I'm working on. And he's like, and I'm gonna have you try to get you to meet with our area general authority and the Utah area presidency. And I'm like, okay, sure. Like,
Yeah, awesome.
that's not what and it's. I told Anna D that I was like, that wasn't my goal. My goal is that ever since I got involved in this, it's to help people heal. And that's really the title is to eradicate racism and build unity. So if you eradicate it, but then you have half of the congregation, half of the body of Christ feeling like they're dismembered, then it totally defeats its purpose. We have to be able to discuss it, understand that Brigham was a man. He allowed the passions of a man to supersede his mantle of being a prophet, which is why we all have free agency. If the Lord didn't give us free agency, then we'd all be perfect because we'd never sinned. Oh, then we'd be following Satan's plan, and then a third of the heavenly host would have been cast out. And I think sometimes we forget that the Lord allows us to make mistakes because he gave us the Savior to use atonement to give us a do-over. And we've talked about this, and Paul has shared this, that he believes vicariously through the three of you that Brigham is like, I need you to fix this. We got to make this right. But I also believe the other prophets after Brigham, down to Harold B. Lee, have all had their eyes opened and are like, I let my personal, no, I'll go to Ezra Taft Benson. I let my personal convictions blind me to what was the right thing to do. And it's hard. We can all admit that how hard is it as a member of the church to, when you hear people bashing the church, to stand up and be bold about defending the church, or be like, well, they have a right to their opinion, and I'm not really going to be combative, and I'm just going to say that, and then maybe I'll say something on the side instead of being willing to say, no, I don't, you're not going to disrespect my church. You can think whatever you want, but you're not going to talk about my church. And I think we need more of that. We need to be willing to say, it's not free thought, but we have prophets who have said, when you come across something that's a hard topic, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
And when I was meeting with the gathered tribes yesterday, I was like, the one thing that the Articles of Faith, official declaration number 1 and official declaration number 2 have in common was each of the prophets were faced with a very strenuous situation. Joseph, under scrutiny, wanted to be able to come up with something to boldly state what we believed. We get the 13 Articles of Faith. Well, for Woodruff, faced with, hey, if we continue to practice polygamy, the U.S. government is going to confiscate our temples. What's more important? We stop having plural marriage, because the basis of the church is forever families. And we continue to be able to go to the temple and have forever families, or we'll be prideful and then we don't have temples because the government's taking it. W. Kimball, seeing the pain and starting to learn and getting petitions from here and seeing how it's affecting people there, spent days, months, and years petitioning the Lord for an answer. And someone asked, well, why did it take so long? Because we had a prophet who was willing to put in the work to get the answer.
Mm.
Think if any of the former prophets put in that work that he put in next to David O. McKay, I think it would have been overturned. We would have got a revelation sooner, because he wanted to know. He was like, I'm not going to die without having an answer. And it's interesting. I was on a call talking with, I don't know if you guys know who this is, Greg Prince.
Yeah. Yeah.
Greg said one of the things that he was talking with Spencer's son, that Spencer's son said, my dad told me that if I don't get an answer about if black men, if it was of God or if it was of man, I know the person who's going to be prophet behind me is not going to do anything about it. Speaking about Ezra Taft Benson, because he knew Ezra Taft Benson was racist.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I was like, I'd read that, but you know, when you read stuff, you're like, maybe. And then for him to say that, I was like, oh, because I'm like, that's crazy that he had that much insight to be like, this has to get an answer today, not tomorrow. Go ahead, Rachel.
Mm.
You're on mute too.
I'm kind of cognizant of time. So we are planning on talking about Declaration 2 on the 14th. But I actually feel like this, I'll do kind of maybe a little wrap up. And if anybody else, of course, has something to say, I don't want to cut people off. But I actually think this leads well, it kind of bleeds well into each other, because what we're sitting here talking about is this concept of, I think, both a prophet and the mantle of the prophet, and also the recognition of the humanness of who we are, period, done, right? We are all given callings. We are all given various things in this life, not even just from a religious perspective, but talents, right? Different things that we are given in this life to go and do good with, that we have stewardship over. And what I see a connection with Malcolm X, and I guess that's where I come from too, is Malcolm X definitely, I like how you framed that. Like, he did change. There was a change in who he was and who he became by the end of his life. And I think that is so what happens to all of us. And I think that's what you see with our prophets too. They are also in this pattern of change and growth and learning what revelation means and learning better leadership and how to better interpret the revelation that they do receive for the general church. And I just see so many comparisons with that. Not that Malcolm X was necessarily a prophet, but he was somebody who came to this earth with some sort of purpose. And he had to figure out what that purpose was, given his past wounds, given all the garbage that was thrown at him in his life. And I actually see Brigham Young very much in the same light. Actually, a lot of the prophets, like if you even read about Joseph F. Smith's life, right? Like crazy lives that you look at that and you're like, man, all this stuff that is given to them, and then they're given this stewardship and this mantle. So I actually really see a lot of similarities with this in the terms of the necessity for us to actually really understand both the role of a prophet and humanity. like this integration of everybody as just a human being, and children of God with great potential and great goodness, but also the ability to make bad choices and do things that aren't good. So I can see that in this kind of full concept there. Looking forward to the 14th, as we kind of have moved in that direction, I would, Ramses, I don't know what you had in mind to do with that, but I know you're in charge.
That makes you feel so good. Like you were like, and you're in charge.
And you're in charge. But I do think this kind of discussion about what these things mean is important. And I also think, because when I was looking through the lesson, it's actually Wilford Woodruff's, the Declaration 1, that a lot of people will point to a quote from him that talks about how the Lord's not going to let the prophet lead anybody astray. Like that is the quote that I hear when people talk about these kinds of things, that God's not going to let the prophet tell us something wrong, right? God's not going to let them guide us in a direction that's wrong. So I guess I would just offer that as a discussion point. So moving forward with that. And then whatever else, I guess, people may or may not want to talk about. But
So I would say for the 14th, oh, that's Sunday.
yeah. Is that still good?
Oh,
Yeah. It just,
It's
If-
Sunday.
if I put into words what the last, I would say, 6 weeks of the year is like, and the days, like, it just, we were talking about something, I was like, oh yeah, that's next week. Oh,
Yeah, it's
that's next week.
it's this
And I'm-
Sunday.
it's this
But
Sunday.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just all,
I'm not going to be able to join us. I'm sorry. I've got a family thing.
Thing going on.
tell your family they can wait.
Tell them to come.
Or join us, huh? I
No.
might. I might.
What I would say for Sunday, just come with questions that you would like to talk about. I mean, we could go through the lesson. It's an interesting perspective that you brought up, Rachel, about the notion that this is where people derive that the Lord won't let a prophet lead the church astray. However, the reality is, where there's truth in that, the Lord also will not take away free agency. And I think that is we pick and choose which parts of the gospel we want to say, yeah, this is where we at. And when I've heard people say that in relation to Revelation or Official Declaration number 2, in the preconceived notions about why the Lord allowed Brigham Young to make the decision he made. And I asked the question, if you knew, and I always go to the extreme on purpose, because small stuff is too easy. I'm like, so if you knew you could cheat on your wife or your husband and get away with it and nobody knew, would you do it? That's the correct answer.
God knows.
Yes, but we're talking about on a telestial level. So when you look at those, like, because to your point, because the Lord knows, is the Lord going to stop you from doing that? The Lord isn't letting you go astray. The Lord is just not taking away your free agency. He just didn't take away Brigham Young's free agency because through and up to section 133, the Lord gives 5 distinct scriptures that tells the leaders, the members, missionaries, whoever is reading Doctrine and Covenants, that the gospel is supposed to go to everyone. And there are no parentheses around it that says, except for Black people of African descent who are supposedly the descendants of Cain or Ham and they're cursed. It doesn't say that. It just says, take the gospel to everyone. That is what I expect you to do. Then go do it.
Yep.
What we've talked about in our dinners is, with that said, you have to remember that before Joseph F. Smith, all the other prophets transitioned from a different religion. They brought the Protestant mentality of the curse of Cain. They came up, church members, Orson Pratt came up with, well, maybe they weren't valiant, maybe they were fence setters, trying to justify and rationalize well, why is Brigham not allowing this to happen? And so I think we just have to remember that the Lord's not going to take away your free agency.
And I like that framework a lot. So,
Yeah.
okay.
And that's where we'll pick up next week.
Sounds good. Or home. So I'll have it on and listen, but
Okay.
so
Okay. Wonderful.
All right,
Sounds
Sunday
great.
evening. See everybody.
Ladies.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.